Welcome back. We're now in Module 18 and we're going to talk briefly in this module about pivot tables. This is Section 1 and I want to show you in this section how to create a brand new pivot table. Some people call pivot tables interactive worksheets because they allow you to take some raw data that you couldn't write formulas for to get certain answers, and a pivot table will allow you to get those answers. Let me go ahead and show you an example of one, and then I'll go ahead and show you how to create one. What we have here is just some raw data. If you notice, they're tracking the store name, the product name, the units, and the sales rep. And when I look down the list, there are no formulas, nothing in here, is just raw data. What if I asked you some questions like this? I would like to know for each sales rep which store they were in and the products that they sold. What if I want to know something like for each sales rep, how many units of each product did they sell? Those are questions you can't have answered by just putting in a formula, and that's where a pivot table becomes very handy for you. Let me give you an example of what a pivot table looks like. I've got one set up down here on this second sheet called Pivot Table. And this is an example of a pivot table. Notice they have listed on the left each of the stores, the products that were sold in that store, the sales rep, and how many of each product they sold. You can also see some grand totals over here, and there's a lot of other types of information we can get out of this, but this is an example of a pivot table. Let me go ahead and flip back to the data sheet, and we're going to create our own pivot tables from this data. A couple things to remember when you're setting up the raw data itself. Make sure Excel recognizes the header rows at the top. Also, there's no formulas in here, no blank cells, none of that. It's just information. When you start your pivot table, you want to be clicked anywhere inside your data here. You're going to the Insert tab at the top, and we're going to insert the first one. It's called a pivot table. Excel will ask you to select the range that you're wanting it to analyze, and because you were clicked in the range, it already knows that. You can see it has the sheet name and the absolute value of the range. It also asks you down here, where would you like to put this pivot table? You can put it in a new worksheet or an existing one that you would have to go and tell Excel what the location is. Let's put it in a new worksheet and click OK. And this is a blank pivot table. Now let me just zoom in a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. What you'll notice is this is the blank pivot table over here, and over on this side you actually have the column headings from your data. You are able to drag and drop these into the table wherever you want to get information that you couldn't get with the raw data. The first thing I want to mention is this pivot table fields window. If you happen to close it like this and go, oh, how do I get it back? Usually you have to click in the table, provided that you didn't turn it off. But if you actually turned it off, notice now you're actually on the Pivot Table Tools Contextual tab. If you're under the Analyze tab under that, you can come over to the right and show the field list, and that will bring this back up. Here's a couple of things I'd like to know. Let's say that I would like a list of all my sales reps, and I'd like them as what we call row fields over here. See how I'm just dragging and dropping this into the pivot table? And now I see all my sales reps. And if you notice, it actually put them down here where it says rows. Some people have to visually conceptualize this. This is why they drag it into the pivot table itself. Other people just know, and they'll drag this all the way down here and get the same result. Whichever one works for you. Now let's say that I'd like to see all my stores across the top here where it says drop column fields. Now there's all my stores. What I'd like to know now is for each sales rep, how many units they sold per store. I can take the units and drop that in the middle where it says drop value fields here, and now I have that information. You can see that Andrews was in the Rochester store and he sold 186 and his total is 186. Now let's say that I want to take this a step further. What I want to know is the same information, but I want to look at it by product as well. I can take this product and drop it at the top where it says drop report filter fields here. And now what I'm seeing is this total represents all of the products. But I could drop the list down, and here's the different products that are sold. And let's say I just want to know the floppy drives. I could click there and click OK. And now you'll see that only a couple of people sold floppy drives. And they're in the Buffalo store, the Rochester store, and the Utica store. And then there's the totals. Isn't that cool? And you can see this is a filter, so if you said, no, I was really wanting to know how many hard drives they sold, you could change it out, and now you have that number per store. The other thing you can do is if you decide that you want to go ahead and clear some of this information out, all you have to do is start dragging these fields out of your pivot table like this. As long as you drag them all the way out like this, the other thing you can do is just uncheck them from here. Either one of those would be perfect. Here's some other scenarios that we could do. Let's say that I want to make the store a report filter field. I'll just drop that up at the top. And then let's say that I'd like to see all the products that I sell, and I'll drop that over on the row fields. And then I want to see this by sales rep. I'll drop that up here. And then we'll look at the number of units. I'll drop that where it says drop value fields here. Now what I'm looking at is here's all the products that I sell. And I can see for each product how many Andrews sold. I can see that Augustine sold 40 hard drives. It looks like Augustine also sold 10 keyboards. And that's for all of my stores. If I only want to look at one store, I can drop the list down, and let's say I pick the Syracuse store and click OK. Now I can see each product for the Syracuse store, each salesperson, and how many they sold. You can keep coming up with all kinds of different scenarios here to get some information out of just raw data, and that's the whole idea of a pivot table. A couple of other things you'll notice is right here in A3 it says sum of units. If I'm going to print this out and be really professional about that, I really don't want it to say that. If I go back up to my Pivot Table Tools Contextual tab, over here you can see that the active field, the one I'm clicked in, is called Sum of Units. There are field settings for this. For example, I'm actually adding, but what if I said give me a count? The same information, but I want a count or an average. You can see that you can pick some of these different functions that we've been talking about. If these are numbers, you'll notice that we're assuming these are dollars, but they could be a number like an amount that we sold. But let's just say they represented dollars. Then I could come over here where it says number format, and I could tell Excel that these represent currency, and then pick my choices. And when I click OK, now these are all currency. I'm going to undo that. I could also, by going back to my field settings, go to the show values as over here, and right now there's no calculations, but I might want to show these as a percentage of the grand total. I might want to show these as a difference from something, a percentage of a difference. There's just all kind of options you can pick here as well. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that, but those are some of the options under your field settings there. Now the other thing is, like I said, if you want this to be more professional, you may not want to say sum of units. You can actually rename what that field looks like. So what I might say is number of units sold. And what's going to happen is when I click enter, you'll see this changes and it now represents the number of units sold. Those are a lot of different things you can do there. There's also some things that have to do with pivot charts that we're going to do here shortly. I want to go ahead and stop the video now, and we'll talk about pivot charts over in section 2.